Good morning, sir. I'm Juspher Malana and I'm ABLS 2-1. 2.4 Anaphora. Anaphoric expression refers to a previous expressed textual unit or meaning, the so-called extended. Anaphora in the context of linguistics is generally understood to refer to relation between two linguistic elements, wherein the interpretation of one called an anaphor is in some way determined by the interpretation of the other called an antecedent. Wang 2000, it may be helpful to know that the term of anaphora is derived from the Greek word avopopa, meaning carrying back his. An example. A. Should Michael peel the potatoes on the board? B. Yes, he can do them there. The anaphoric expressions in B. Insurance, their antecedents are as follow. He, Michael, do peel them, the potatoes, and there, and the words the. The foxbots, the anaphoric expression, and their antecedents refers to the same entities. They are co-referential, is a characteristic of many anaphora but not of the axis. This is not to say that there is no overlap with the axis. Readers will have note by that the form here there is also used as a deactive expression. Indeed, in B, insurance on called imagine a scenario in which there is used not only to break refer back to the on the board, but to pick of the actually the particular board to use the speaker could simultaneously points. Expressions functioning anaphorically comprise most frequently third person noun, e.g. he, and repeated of synonymous noun pairs, e.g. in the above example could have repeat the potatoes. But also the example other defined noun phrases including pronoun demonstrative such as those proper nouns, proforms, e.g. do, and adverb, e.g. there. To this list, we might add the absence of an expression where it is expected a gap in the syntax. A typical example is the absence of the second finite verb in coordinate structure such as she took kindly to him and he took kindly to her. Proposed function, the novel, the holy thief. Needles to say the resource available for expressing anaphoric reference vary from language to language. For example, some language e.g. Salt, you, and Papuan language lack third person pronouns deploying full nominal expressions instead. Shariksi ka 2004 who cite Irvin 1974. As one of might guess, even typical anaphoric expressions are not always anaphoric and do not always refer, at least not straightforwardly. Consider this example, all of which concerns the third person singular pronoun. 2.5 Using understanding referring expression in interaction. This is a creative way to begin a novel. It's create psychological prominence. We have the outline of a puzzle here, but not the piece with which to complete it. We know that some group of people they are located in some space away from where the speaker writer is out there. The referring expression begin the build the point of view of the particular character, the protagonist who in incarnate created in a mental institution. It flags the kind of context that needs fleshing out. This helps active the dramatic purpose of the novel, as we point out in section 2.2 definite pronoun phrases presuppose the existence of their reference and can be used and invite the participants to identify a particular referent from a specific context, which is assumed to be a share. Thus, the defined noun phrases in the book you're reading is great example 2.3 may be taken as identifying the book of speaker since you're reading rather than say the one you need to read when you go to bed because you both share through physical present visual context. That specific context, however, the definite noun phrases in the Oden poem are not like this. They propose the existence of clocks, telephones, dog, pianos, coffin, and mourners, but in doing this, they also contrast the context in which the particular reference can be defined. They do not possibly rely on a specially shared context for interpretation, rather they construct a specific shared context in which they can be interpreted. Reflection. Person markers in the history of English. English used to have a somewhat different system of grammaticalized expression available of didactic purpose regarding personal pronouns on notable difference concerned number. While today we can use mass personal pronouns distinguish number, insofar as the different is singular or plural, e.g. I versus we. In Old English, there were also the remnants of the dual form of the first and second personal pronoun. Thus, which means we both and yet means you both. This is of course would also have applicants for what at the time content as plural in this grammatical system. It would have been more than two whereas today it is more than one. However, the area of radical change concern the second person pronoun. Elizabeth English, for example, offered a choice between two sets of pronominal form of for the second person. The form me, you, your, yours, and yourself. The you form and the form thou, thee, thy, tin, and they self. The thou form in Old English we generally use the first set for a plural referent and the sounds for the singular, but by Middle English the variant chosen will be significant social implication. This item had taken on a stronger social didactic role rather than just personal. The usage of these sets in a matter with controversy. Brown and Gilman 1960 predicted that high status social equals use U forms to each other. Low status social equals use the forms to each other. High status individual use to firms, to lower status and lower status individuals use U firm to higher status. This predication fit the use of Middle English personally well. One can see a certain similarity in the way U form and to form were used in this period of English with the way, for example, to and was are used in today French, Urdu, and C is German. However, this predication becomes more and more unreliable as we move towards the 7th century. The meaning of any particular usage has increasingly to be inferred from the specifics of context. Take this brief extract from the Merry Tales of Skelton, 1567, as an example. In this take Skelton, a person tries to persuade the cover to go to war. 2.11 Neither you be tall man and in the night's wears you must bear a standard. In table 2.2, we have split personal deaxis into two subcategories, one pertaining to participant making and the other pertaining the social relationship making. The latter of subcategory in often referred to as social deaxis. This is absolutely no hard and fast distinction between these two subcategories. See Marmadido 2079. The history of U forms and TO forms is in English in case in a point. Today English relies largely on vocatives expressions usually used to address people to mark social relationships, especially in the form of noun phrases, usually comprised of proper noun and or titles. Note, of course, the overlap there with the discussion of proper nouns in section 2.3. However, remember that we are focusing the non-deactic verb come here. A summary of social deactic expression in present by British English with very brief indication regarding context of usage and the proportion of usage encountered for by each type expression as a percentage in as follow from which 1999 109-113 and Weber et al 1999 1111 and dash 1113. As might have been observed from the above summary, social deactive expression marks not only social relationship but also amongst other factors settings and in particular their degree of formality. A good example of social deaxis restricted to a particular setting in the usual of some names only in more traditional school. Notably, British public school does not just by teachers to publish but also to an extent between pupils themselves. Social distance, as we have seen for all referring expression in this module, are not always used in social always that their encode meaning matches their usage. Mismatches are often deployed for the purpose of generation local social meaning. Consider, for example, the range of possible reference for the English form we base on the list given in CWorksa 2004.215. Some of these mismatch have become well established. A is, and of course, the royal we pragmatically ay a more recent example of which are the words of Margaret Thatcher upon discovering that she had become a grandmother. We might also briefly note that sometimes the issue is one of focusing the target attention. Thus, why here he is might well convey the facts that somebody has arrived in the vicinity. It also draw attention to the facts, and that in I like that one said, several items all the same distance from the speaker focus the target attention on one particular item. In order to rank up level up of formally of thus strengthen the request order. The general and important points here that each proper noun has its own semantic coloring which feeds into interpretive processes in interaction is true. Of all referring expressions, also it is important to note that no one proper noun from necessarily performing a referring function all the time. For example, Mike, maybe though of as a proper noun, a popular short form of Michael, but it is a common noun in this sentence. When he first came in, I referred him a drink out of courtesy, and I think he thought it was taking the make of drinking in the past BNC 81 1224. Part of biography, indeed proper nouns involving into common nouns, so cancelled eponyms is a regular method of word formation. We now turn to the axis, the category of the bottom of table 2.1. We will discuss anaproma in this section following this one the axis realis heavily though not completely on the extra linguistic context to supply the different and not semantic elements within the actic expression itself. It may be helpful to note here that the word deactic is borrowed from the Greek deactikos, meaning able to showing directly the axis involved connections between reference points and aspects of the situation in which the alternance takes place. The actic expression invite participants to work out participants' connections. When somebody telephones another and say it's me, they invite the interlocutor to work out on the basis of oral characteristics that me refers to the speaker. Occasionally, of course, the speaker assumption that the interlocutor can work out who is speaking turn out to be wrong. And the interlocutor has as specifically who is something which is potentially embarrassing because the speaker assumed that you were sufficiently familiar with them to identify them. Consider another example, this time provided by Charles Fillmore, 1997-60. 2.8. The worst possible can imagine for a totally unscored as occasion sentence in the of finding afloat in the ocean of a battle, containing a note which reads, meet here and noon tomorrow with a stick about this big? Who is me? Who is her? Who is tomorrow? And how big is this? Example such as this neatly illustrate how one's understanding happens on making connection between a reference points that is the active century of or anchorage points from which the speaker position their discourse in a particular context. If we not makes these connections, we up we ends up with very limited understanding. The active century is generally I hear now of the speaker, or more accurately, of the speaking voice in the particular situation. The speaking voice could be that of for example, an individual, a group of people, of character in a book. The active expression signal a perspective relative to a particular deactive century. You, you is my, I your, here is my, there, etc. In conversation, the active concert obviously flip back and forth according to who is speaking. The active sundry can also be rejected if somebody rings you up and invites you over from some coffee. You may reply, I'll come over in a few minutes. Come in the active verb as it suggests the movement of something in the context towards the active century. In this case, the active century is not that of the speaker but that of the addressee. This is a case of the active projection. The speaker projects the active century onto the addressee and speaks from the points of view of the addressee. A key point about the active expressions is that they interface with grammatically system. This future is true of in Levenson's 1983-54 definitions of the axis. The axis concerns the ways in which language encodes of grammatically is futures of the context of insurance of speech event, and thus also concern ways in which the interpretation of insurance depends on the analysis of the context of insurance. Expressions such as I, me, and my are most clearly part of grammatical system. We shall see in a moment how the context of insurance has not always been grammaticalized in the same way in earlier period of English. Table 2.2 displays the type of deaxis traditionally identified and their associated expression. Of course, the active expression can be used non-deactively. Consider the underlined item in the sentence. 2.9. Read the small print. You never know what you may find. BNCTX 1117. Popular lore. The magazine what personal computer. Now there is another way to advertising of with Horrogate not coming off. I must say, I'm quiet. Keen on this. BNC G9P 250 public speech charity commit meeting. Expressions as I, me, and my are most clearly part of grammatical system. Sentence use a few lines above. Here you imagine generic use not referring to any in particular. It is similar to one never knows. There does not pick out particular location, but is a case of extension there. That is also a kind of dummy subject which occurs in clause about the sentence of occurrence of something finally. I, me, and my do not refer to the speaker, as they are metalinguistic mentions of the pronoun rather than use of them. As Fillmore 1997 points of even demonstrative, a category that seems to be the poorest category of deactic item is in fact have both deactic and non-deactic usage. Gestural usage, such as these foot are supposed by a gesture like pointing. There are deactic symbols usage is contrast really on general spatio-temporal knowledge. They could be accompanied by gesture but would still be understood within. For example, in this newspaper headline, technology that makes this country the best, The Guardian, 1913. It will be obvious to most UK-based Guardian readers that this country refers to the UK, without gestures. The converse is also true. Typically, non-deactic expression can be used deactically. For example, he or she would not normally discuss a deactic expression as they are typically anaphoric, referring back to some things mentioned previously in this discourse rather than connection with the extralinguistic context. We will discuss anaphora in the following section. But it's not true. Different is imagine a context in which they clearly have a deactic referring function. Consider it a reconstructed conversation during which a parent bring carrying baby into the room and an interlocutor says, we should also keep in mind the fact that items within categories such as those of table 2.1 vary with respect to the degree to which they are semantically descriptive and contextually pragmatic. For example, here indicates the speaker spatial deactive center, but can also encodes the meaning of locomotions towards it. Let us elaborate on the particular categories of Table 2.2. Personal as deactic categories refers to the identification of the discourse role in the speaking situation, the speaker, the first person, the hearer, the second person, and the party being talked about, the third person. Person is heavily important grammatically category. First, second, and or third, person is marked or implying all endurance. An indication of its important in English is in the facts that the second most frequent word is spoken in English is I and the third is you. It's as al 2144. As we noted earlier, the most frequent is the personal deaxis invites participants to identify the relevant discourse rules in the context. Personal markers are not devoid of decoded meaning. In fact, they really encode personal alone but also have alone grammatical distinction. In English, these are number, e.g. I versus we, gender, e.g. he versus she, and case, e.g. she or her, not her, that the active person markers are typically the first and second person, not the third person from are generally anaphoric that is not extra-linguistic but referring back to the linguistic context of the insurance. True, as illustrated in the previous paragraph, person from could be used diacritically. 2.6 Suddenly, small single-decker bus appeared at a corner not far away. BNC ADM 884, an academic social science, the book Jointing Through Ireland. Clearly, we are referring to a particular identifiable bus in a particular context, despite the facts that an indefinite article is used. Compare this with a noun referring use of an indefinite expression such as 2.7. To she, to bird, a bus, a solitary student in London, he walked miles around that was sharpening his observation. BNC AN 8 E8F 665 newspaper The Guardian. In section 2.5 we will examine the function of referring expression including definite expression more closely. We propose nouns to invite hearers to identify the unique individual or set of individuals. We are talking about proper noun inherently identify a unique individual or set of individuals. They have definiteness built in and thus appears as a subcategory of definite expression in Table 2.1. These facts may partly explain why in English one word not normally put a definite article before a proper noun. Jonathan of the Michael sounds decidedly odd except in limited context such as that's not the Jonathan I was talking about. See also the reflection box below. However, this is not a full explanation because some other language do allow a definite article before a proper noun. For example, in some dialects of Italian, definite articles are systematically used before personal names, e.g., La Maria. And in Italian, generally, they are used before names of countries, e.g., La Germania. And this is not a bizarre as it may seem to the native English speaker. A century ago, Russell 1910 and 1911 argued the proper nouns are not just empty shell as to refer to a particular individuals but are associated with a descripted content which determines what they refer to, somewhat like definite common noun phrases such as a book. Reflecting proper noun and meaning. Whatever one agreed, the proper noun work through associated descripted content of or not, and this is indeed controversial. There is no doubt that proper nouns are not the purest of reflecting expression that are not devoid of an abstract semantic meaning. They have rich connotation with the line between connotative and denotative sense being fuzzy. Kosaf 1993 140. Having reviewed a vast quantity of research, most of it North American, and conducted studies of his own, conclude that both first names and surnames different in attractiveness and connote expression of the name, bearer age, intellectual competence, race, ethnicity, social class, and other attributes. It is not difficult to understand how these different associations have developed. At different times, different names have been fashionable, and different social groups have preferred particular names. For example, the names Kevin and Tracy, though popular in the mid-80s, have experienced rapid decline. See figures in Dunkling 1995, presumable because they become strongly associated with the young, money working class people of late transit Britain. When some scholar e.g. with 1972 may argued with some reason against descriptive context view saying that proper nouns directly refers without any mediating semantic context. Proper noun clearly to have connotation. The is not only in the assignment of reference in context but also in the overall interruption. For example, a author, tutor, writing the some an exclusive student may sign the commutation Jonathan Culpeper as opposed to Jonathan. Reflection. The development of the English. The earliest stage of English had no definite article, nor did it have a constraining indefinite article. Speakers and writers in the Old English, approximately 500 to 1100, deployed demonstrative from C, from which they seem to have developed for some of the function undertaken by today. The C is the demonstrative masculine form of the demonstrative and may not bring any represent the demonstrative verbs, but the demonstrative and accusative neuter form is with the first letter of his word expressions, the sounds letter represented by th, from which, as explained to see, is derived the present, the demonstrative that e.g. pass me that sandwich please. Let us look at an example demonstrative and underline. 2.4. Her Aswald C. Ediga Archbishop Frolet Bis Life and Jefferdy Bate. F. Fonny Lice and AOL Wine Ildorman. G4 on Bam Ilkan Year the year 992 Anglo-Saxon Chronicle Loud MS. Here as well that the blessed Archbishop gave up this life and reached the heavenly life and underman, nobleman, either wine departed this life in that the same year. As one can see from the present day translation, there are 2 points where the Old English demonstrative can be withered by either represent the or that. Both signal definiteness, that is, they invite participant to identify a particular entity, i.e., a particular archbishop, a particular year, today. The difference between the and that is this context is that unlike the is used to focus the target attention on something, but in Old English this use is not so clear. Incidentally, the other instance of that is that heavenly life is not the same. In this case, it involved a deictic contrast with the previous demonstrative is such that the represent move from the relatively close states of this life to the relative faraway states of the heavenly life, we will discuss the active matter of more fully in section 2.3. But the points to note here is that the Old English demonstrative C along with its various forms was deployed in a range of functions, including those for which we would regularly use the word the today. Over time, then a demonstrative form has developed into the definite article the English language has today. Note, with particular reference to table 2.1 is has moved from the relatively contextual extralinguistic category of deictic expression to the relative abstract linguistic category of definite expressions. In other words, from more pragmatics to less. English is not alone the way its definite article developed definite articles in Romance language, e.g., French, Italian, Spanish, such as li, el, lola, how developed from the Latin. Demonstrative el, li, ella, masculine, definite, feminine, although there is are complexities for specific dialects of this language. Cf. Glynn Andrew, 1996. Although the categories in Table 2.1 do not always represent continuous links in a chain, if particular items develop function outside an initial category, they are usually function that belongs to a less contextually determined category. They really less on a specific context for a particular meaning and instead have the same meaning for arranged context. That is, they are more abstract. It is a matter of controversy, and wherever this is true of all language, see Franchinger, 1996, for some counter evidence. Thus, not only the definite expression of developed from the active expression and proper noun sometimes develop in common nouns. Hence, eponymic nouns such as Wellingtons, cardigans, sandwich, sadiasim, and atlas. This movement is consistent with what has in historical linguistics been referred to as grammaticalization. As a lexical construction enters and continues along a grammaticalization pathway and undergoes such change in meaning, broadly interpretable as representing a unit direction movement away from its original or create reference and work forward increasingly generally and abstract reference. Pagliuca, 1994, IX. Pagliuca statement makes the connection with a movement away from meaning anchored in a concrete context towards the abstract. Reflection marking definiteness. Many European languages are like English in having a separate word or words, making definiteness other language such as the Scandinavian language Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Icelandic, and the Semitic language Hebrew, Arabic, and Kurdish use a affix rather than a separate word, yet other languages such as Latvian, Seksa, and Indonesian regularly deploy and demonstrative e.g. this that for this purpose English can also use a demonstrative to signal definiteness. Try substituting this or that for there in sentence. 2.3 above. But is It is not regularly provided just to mark definiteness in the way that there is still other language such as Chinese, Japanese, and Russian, and many other Slavic language use none of these resources to mark definiteness. This is why, of course, a distinctive feature of English spoken by speaker of this language is the lack of the definite article considered this sentence with writing by a Japanese pragmatic student. It is principle of conversation. Indeed, some research on making definiteness in English in interaction where all the participants are non-native speakers has suggested the wrapping the definite article in the some instance where is word to required in standard form of English and inserting with where it words that normally be grammatically required is a future of English as lingua franca. C of instant seed offer 2001. Referential pragmatics. It, it is not the case that any one form such as the example of definite expression shown in table 2.1 will always have referring function which coincidentally is partly why this upper pragmatics not semantic issues consider this sentence. 2.5 But bus and train are much the same price at the moment through it's quicker to take the bus. BNC popular lore periodical outdoor action. This is not likely to be referring to a particular bus but to any vehicle with the attributes of a bus is a non-referential descriptive usage of a definite expressions as opposed to referential usage. This distinctive was labeled attributive version referential by Dominal 1966. Here we are talking about buses, interpreter to work out the more general category transport of which this is a specific subcategory buses. So in this case, the definite expression is not used to signal an act of identification but a distinction between the specific and the general. Additionally, we might note here the definite expression can also consider this sentence. Referential pragmatics. Let's 1983 briefly mention the label for the area that we will discuss in this module, namely referential pragmatics. He, he defines it as the assignment of reference to a referential expression in a given insurance. The notion of reference briefly popped up in the previous module. Let us explore the area through an example. Consider this statement. The Palgrave editor visited me in my office today. The Palgrave editor is who exactly. There are several such editors who work for the publisher Palgrave, and there have been many such editors. Which one are we talking about? This is a referring expression directing the reader to pick out a specific person from the context. Similarly, my office is directing the reader to pick out a particular place. Again, the reader will have to work out which office is being talked about. What of me and my? Clearly, they refer to the author of this statement and is up the reader to work out who that author is. Similarly, today refers to the time period in which the author was writing, and we would need to work out when that is. All these expressions involve working out connections with context. They are referring expressions. In a very general sense, an expression used in relation to something out there in the world. A word which includes the discourse we create can be said to involve reference to something. Reference, broadly conceived, is a topic of special interest in some semantic and philosophy. This kinds of very general relation is not our focus here. For more on this, see Fried Classic, 1892-1952, work on sense and reference. Here, we are interested in expression such as those in our example, whose meaning will seem inadequate without the interpreter having made a connection with a specific part of a specific context, a referent. The fact that those expressions involve a referent, an entity to which they refer, means that all referring expressions propose the existence of an entity we will use the term referring to denote the narrower, more dynamic, indeed pragmatic, use of expression that connects with context both drawing meaning from it and shaping it. Note that referring expressions do not in themselves refer to entities but are used and interpreted by participants as doing so. That is what makes the pragmatic. One key issue when considering referring expression is naturally what specific as aspect of context the speaker is referring to in pragmatics. There are at least the key diminution involved in referring. Consider, for instance, the following excerpt from the film For Wedding and a Funeral which start when Charles attempts to introduce himself to another guest at the wedding. Charles, how do you do? My name is Charles. Guess, don't be ridiculous. Charles died 20 years ago. Charles, must be a different Charles, I think. Guess, are you telling me I don't know my own brother? Charles, no, no. We can identify at least three different forms of referring going on in this rather confused interaction. First, we have both Charles and the guest referring to themselves, and the other to various pronouns includes I and you. This involves pointing the specific referent in the extralinguistic context and most importantly indicating how his referent relates to some points of reference. Here the speaker. This is traditional term deixis. Second, there is some confusion. On the guest part at least, as the weather Charles when saying my name is Charles refers to a person the guest already knows or one he getting to know at that very moment, or what we might term specific aspects of context. In this case, the speaker are referring to higher different assumption about who they think the other person had in mind. When the speaker assumes that the hearer knows the specific referent in mind, this comes under scope of definiteness, while when the speaker doesn't make such an assumption, it is matter of indefiniteness, the course of the guest. Confusion. Here is the guest has his brother in mind when Charles is referred to and consequently thinks that Charles does as well third some expressions. They use us to refer back to things they have back to his previous reference to Charles who died 20 years ago. Instant we're speaking are referring back to what has been earlier referred in his previous talk, or what might be termed linguistic aspect of context of context comes under the scope of anaphora. Is in this module, we will explain in more details the pragmatics of this three form of referring. Supplying a list of English referring expression is not straightforward. However, as debates reach over there to draw the lines with respect to what is referring and what is not. Let us first briefly consider the extreme all scholars would agree the verb and preposition are not referring expressions. Consider our example 2.1 above. The verb visited and the proposition is were the only items we did not claim to be referring expression. To understand them, you do not need to pick out a specific visit of specific spatial relations with respect to the office. We ignore here the facts that visited carries a past tense marker. The other extreme is more controversial. Many, if not all, scholars would agree that the demonstrative this is a referring expression of some kind, but there are others possible candidates for referring expressions too. Table 2.1 lists English referring expressions that are true to be by many scholars. In broad terms, the categories of Table 2.1 are ordered from those whose meaning is more descriptive, more encoded in the abstract sense of expression, to those whose meaning is more contextual, more dependent on a relationship with a specific context aspect. The former is more semantic and the latter more pragmatic. The book, a defined expression, has some descriptive meaning in the abstract, as the noun book denotes denotes the concept of books, although we don't know which particular books is being referred to. His dialectic expression has very little descriptive meaning in the abstract, although we may suppose that is concerned something relatively close in some way to the speak voice. Compare with that, the organization of the module is based on this table. First, we attend to the extreme of table definite expression followed by diactic expression and then anaphoric expressions in this middle. In the final section, we take a more interactional view of how referring expressions are used and understood. Table 2.1 Categories of English referring expressions. Category Define expression. Define noun phrases. Proper noun. Anaphoric expression. Deictic expression. Example: the book, books, Jonathan, more course, may example, etc. Michael Smith profession, which, etc. It's the herself, this that I hear now tomorrow. More semantic, more pragmatics. 2.2 Definite of expressions. Definite expression encode some semantic meaning in their nominal elements. For example, as mentioned above, book is the definite expression. The book relates to whatever mental representation you have for the concept of a book. Moreover, Fred 1892 note that a definite expression not only denotes sometimes but also applies that is exists. We will pick up on this is our discussion of prepositions in section 3.2.2. Russell 1905, however, agreed that the key issue with expression such as the book is not just that they imply existence but that generally they indicate uniqueness. A particular book is our example. For Russell, definite expressions do not refer directly to something. It is simply a matter of finding a true match between the semantic descriptive content of the expression and may candidates for a match in the world. Other, such as Strawson 1950, argue from a more pragmatic perspective that it all depends on the use of the expressions in context. For example, the semantic of the book in the contextualist sentences apart, the book may signal that a unique book is involved, but you are unlikely to know exactly which book is being referred to. In contrast, if somebody arrived in the room where you are have now and said the same to you, you may be led into thinking not only that a unique book is involved, but also that they refer to the very book you are how reading. And if they arrive when you were reading in bed, you might think that they refer to your bedtime novel. A starting point is to say that definite expressions are primarily used in invited the pragmat participants to identify the particular referent from a specific context which assume to be shared by the interlocutors. We hear these issues further below, especially in section 2.5. There are various ways in which language can signal definiteness. Paradigm method in English is the definite article, the most frequent word in written of and spoken English. Leads it out 2001, 181, and 144. Like other noun phrase determiners, such as passive determiner pronouns, e.g., my, your, are, their book, demonstrative, e.g., that's book, or S, genitive, e.g., Jonathan's book. Definite article determine the definiteness of the noun phrase compared to the sentence in 2.3. A. The book you're reading is great. B. A book you're reading is great. You're likely interpret A as referring to the book you are currently reading. Apologize for the immodesty. But with B, it could be about any book you are currently reading. This book, other course books. There's novel you read when you go to the bed. etc. B contains the definite article, a constraint with the definite article, the part of from noun phrase which determines pronouns, e.g., I, you, she, it can express definiteness in English as can proper nouns, a topic we will discuss below.